Okay, I need to show you something I am so excited about. All right, drum roll. This is my new bike, my dream bikepacking bike. And in this video, I'm gonna do a bit of a new bike check, but I'm also gonna explain why I think an XC mountain bike like this is the perfect bikepacking bike. So this is a Cannondale Scalpel HT. They sell two versions of this bike in Canada. One is like the high mod expensive version. One is the sort of more affordable version. This is the more affordable version. I think, you know, outside of the components being a little less premium, the frame is also a slightly heavier carbon fiber, but it's still a extremely light bike. So when I was looking for a new bike specifically for bikepacking trips, I was thinking about sort of the condition spectrum. You know, on one hand you have pavement, on the other hand you have single track, and maybe you've got FSRs somewhere in the middle. And with bikepacking, you really need something that can handle the single track but doesn't feel so sluggish on sort of the pavement and gravel side. If you are just on the road, then an endurance road bike would be perfect. If you are only going to be doing single track, then maybe just a straight up mountain bike is the right choice for you. But I think for what generally speaking people do as bikepacking trips, where there's a little bit of single track, there's chunky gravel and maybe some sections of pavement in between, an XC mountain bike is the way to go. So the first thing that makes an XC mountain bike, and this bike in particular, so good for bikepacking is the front suspension. So one of the things I've been looking for in a bikepacking bike compared to my rigid, more gravel focused bike is a suspension fork. I find that on single track I struggle quite a bit, and then spending long hours on rough gravel roads is tough on the body. You really get shaken around, and I think having some suspension is really key. Leo, glad. So this is a Fox 32 step cast, which is basically the lightest suspension fork you can find. It's only 100 millimeters of travel, which is not a lot in the front suspension world. But for bikepacking trips where we're only really looking at doing easy single track, and we also want it for sort of the comfort on those long gravel roads, 100 millimeters is perfect. And the fact that it's so light means, it's not burdensome to sort of bring with you when you are bikepacking. In my view, a light and short travel suspension fork is perfect for bikepacking, and that is essentially pretty standard on most XC mountain bikes. Another bonus is that because XC mountain bikes are generally racing focused, they've got a lockout, which is great when you want to be able to lock the suspension out. Let's say you've got a long pavement climb and you don't want to lose any of that power. Now there are a lot of XC mountain bikes that are a full suspension bike where they've got maybe 100 to 120 millimeters of travel in the front and then something in the back as well. And it's not to say that these wouldn't also make good bikepacking bikes, but I think my preference is still the hardtail. It's enough suspension without adding extra weight and taking up potential room to carry things in the frame. So another thing about XC mountain bikes that I think make them ideal for bikepacking is the geometry. I'm not exactly an expert on geometry, but I understand sort of the basic principles. I think my ideal bikepacking bike is one that feels comfortable on long rides, is confident on single track without feeling too sluggish when you're on pavement or some of that cleaner, nicer, hard packed gravel. And I think an XC mountain bike hits that zone really well. So first off is the head tube angle. Most XC mountain bikes have a fairly slack head tube angle in comparison to a gravel bike. So this bike in particular has a 69-degree head tube angle, which essentially means that your front wheel is a lot farther ahead of you than your handlebars, and it's just a lot more confidence inspiring when you are on single track. Now, the disadvantage essentially of having a slacker head tube angle is that it puts you in a more upright body position, which essentially makes you very non-aero, which can feel sluggish when you're on the road or you're at higher speeds on some gravel trails. But it's also nice to have that more upright position when you are on the bike for really long hours. So sort of the balance between being too slack and not slack enough is really key. And I think the XC mountain bike range of sort of 68 to 71 degrees for the head tube angle is exactly the right zone. Another thing that I think makes XC mountain bike geometry great is the seat tube angle. So the seat tube angle, essentially the steeper it is, the more power you can transfer into your pedal strokes. The slacker it is, the more sort of comfortable and confident it's going to be on single track. XC mountain bikes tend to have fairly steep seat tube angles because they're prioritizing being able to climb really fast. And that definitely shows. This bike can climb. I think because XC mountain bikes have to prioritize speed and still be able to handle fast single track descents, they really get that sort of sweet spot of being fast but still confident on single track. And I think that's ideal for bikepacking. Okay, I gotta swap this around for this part because next we're talking about gearing. Okay, so the next reason I think XC mountain bikes make perfect bikepacking bikes is the gearing. In my view, the perfect bikepacking bike gearing is a 1x with a maybe 10 to 52 tooth cassette in the back, and I'd say 32 to 34 tooth in the front. I think this is ideal because one, you have less maintenance. It's a little easier when you are sort of on rougher terrain to handle a 1x, and you also want that really easy climbing gear. The reason why I think gearing is so important is that when you are bikepacking, your bike is loaded up with gear. You're often doing tons of climbing, sometimes really punchy, steep climbs, and having an easy gear to climb in makes a huge difference. I think the XC bike gearing is much better for that than a lot of sort of the 2x or 1x gravel bikes that are out there. So one fun thing about this bike is that it has the SRAM Eagle GX AXS, that is an absolute mouthful, derailleur, which is electronic shifting. So this is the first bike I've ever had with electronic shifting, and yeah, I'm fully converted. Being able to go from my highest to lowest gear and vice versa in a second is huge when you're going from a steep descent to a fast ascent. And yeah, I absolutely love it. The SRAM Eagle derailleurs also have a different hanger mechanism, which I don't fully understand, but I do think it is pretty confidence inspiring in terms of not being as worried about breaking the derailleur. And I've broken a lot of derailleurs over the last few years. So again, I think that's a real big pro for XC mountain bikes, is that they're just a little hardier and designed to handle some rougher things and all the things you might throw at it on a long bikepacking trip. Tire clearance is super important when choosing a bikepacking bike. You don't need fat bike tire clearance, but you definitely want something that can handle something between sort of 2 to 2.6 inches of tire clearance. On this bike I can run 29ers with 2.4 inches of clearance. Right now I'm just running 2.25 inch tires, the tires that came stock with. I've got a Racing Ralph on the rear and a Racing Ray on the front, which I've actually been loving. They're very similar to the Victoria Mezcals that I have on my other bike that I've done tons of bikepacking with. And yeah, I have no desire to change these. I am running these tubeless, which I also think is a big pro. I have yet to get a flat with these tires, and I get tons of flats biking with my tube setup here in Squamish. So that has been a really nice change of pace. Most XC bikes out on the market are going to be able to handle, you know, sort of 2 to 2.6 inch tires, no problem. Most of them are going to come tubeless ready, and most of them are going to be 29ers, which I think is preferred. It's a little faster, you've got better rolling resistance, and it feels a lot less sluggish on the road. So I think that's another win for the XC mountain bike. Next we got to talk about weight. You don't want to? No? XC mountain bikes are designed for speed. They're designed for racing generally, and that means weight is taken into account. This bike is carbon fiber. You can get XC mountain bikes that are aluminum, I think maybe even steel, but either way, they are going to have weight taken into account. And man, this bike is so light. This bike loaded with gear is basically the same weight as my Surly Bridge Club. It is crazy. And on a long bikepacking trip, that definitely helps. I wouldn't say I'm a weight weenie. I'm not cutting down my toothbrush or, swapping all my clothes with Dyneema fabric to save 50 grams. But this bike is so much lighter than my steel bike that I notice it immediately. And on the bikepacking trip that I recently did, it felt so nice to have shed some of that weight. I don't think weight is the most important factor when you're buying a bike, but I do think that having a light bike makes bikepacking a little easier, a little more enjoyable. You'll be able to go a little farther, you'll be a little less tired and be able to enjoy it more, which makes an XC bike perfect because again, they're sort of built to be fast, and fast is light. Light is fast. Okay, it wouldn't be completely fair if I didn't give some negatives on an XC mountain bike for bikepacking, and I just gave you pros. So here is what I think is the biggest con with a bike like this. As much as the front suspension is, I think, an absolute game changer for bikepacking, it does represent something else that can break and something that needs maintenance. So now you've got more maintenance on your bike, which is not always the best, especially if you are doing long bikepacking trips. And the other big con, I think the biggest con with a bike like this, is that there are no mounting point. Because these bikes are designed to be super fast, they have a front suspension fork, there are just no places to mount things outside of the two bottle cages. With my Surly Bridge Club, there are mounting points everywhere. I can put things under my tube, I can put things on my fork, I can put things on my rear stays. There are so many places to bolt things to the bike, and there is none of that with a XC mountain bike. When you are just designed to do races, you don't need those, and so that I think is a disadvantage. Now there are lots of creative ways to carry gear that don't require those. There is a growing number of companies making gear that doesn't require those sort of bolt-on connections. You can get bags that go on the rear stays without being bolted in. Same with the front fork and the down tube, but then that is essentially buying more stuff, which I'd say is a negative. Okay, so since this is also sort of a new bike check, I thought I'd show you some of the add-ons that I put on this bike that make it an absolute bikepacking beast. Okay, so first off, I think my favorite thing that I've done with this bike is I put this Fred bar and aero bars on the top. Because this is a flat bar setup, there aren't a ton of hand positions, which when I'm on really long rides, when I am on a bikepacking trip, I like to be able to change up my hand position so that I can be comfortable. Aero bars are new to me, and I will say that they have been amazing. Being able to completely take the weight off my hands is huge, and I want them on all of my bikepacking bikes now. It is so nice to be able to take your weight completely off your hands, get into a nice aero position. I find it super comfortable, and it's just a little faster. When I'm sort of on the pavement going to a trail, getting down in that position, when I'm just very lightly pedaling on this bike, I'm going sort of 20 to 22 kilometers an hour on a flat. I go into that position and I'm immediately like 26, 28, and it's just really fun, comfortable. It's nice to have that extra position. The Fred bar sort of raises it up a little bit, so it's not like I'm leaning so far forward, and that's great. Plus, because this is an AXS electronic shifting, I have these little shifting blips in the front, which means I can actually shift gears while I'm in that position instead of sort of having to go back up, shift, and then go back down into that position. It has been awesome. Another add-on to this bike that I think is really cool and I'm very happy about is this 1UP Components stem tool. So basically it is a tool which allows me to keep a bunch of tools in the stem. Quality of this tool is actually awesome. It comes with a little red stem cap which matches the bike, and yeah, I just think it's nice. And last but not least, I do have a dropper post on this bike. This is also a 1UP Components C-post. It's just a 90mm dropper, so it's nothing crazy, which is mostly just for sort of biking around town, exercising. I don't actually have a seat post bag that can handle a dropper, so I can't use it while I'm bikepacking, but it is super fun on descents. It lets me get way lower. It lets me really push my descents, and I definitely want to try and find a seat post bag that will accommodate this dropper because I do think it would actually be great on bike packing. To get a little lower on those descents, especially when the bike is loaded up and it's a little less nimble, I think that might help get rid of some of the hike-a-bike sections that I have struggled with in the past. Now, I specifically got the Cannondale Scalpel because it was on sale. There are other brands that make similar, you know, hardtail XC mountain bikes. There's the Trek Pro Caliber Specialized, have like an HT chisel comp. I think most companies have one that will be sort of carbon fiber, really light, have the same geometry, a similar sort of front suspension, and will be really great for bike packing. Yeah, I think because of all those factors, an XC mountain bike makes the perfect bike packing bike, and this has been so fun to ride. I have already done one bike packing trip with it and it was awesome. I have another 9-day bike packing trip planned next month. It is so fun, rips around, it is fast, it is capable, and yeah, I'm loving it.